Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Swati. I'm here at the New York office. I wrote and directed this film in 2019-20, and it's an independent research project. I've been focusing on gender studies in architecture in several installments since 2015, and it brings me great joy to share some part of this work with you. I'll start with a brief introduction. Half of world's population constitutes women, and we still fail to address the issue of gender inequality. Recent data suggests in the UK, women per week spend 5 hours more time on household work than men. A nugget of research that compelled me to dive deeper into this work was done at the School of Gender Studies at the Tata Institute, also included in the film. It illustrated a heat map analysis of several middle income housing typologies in Mumbai. In most houses, the kitchen was enclosed within 4 walls and a door, giving less to zero visibility and audibility to the person operating it, which in most cases is a woman. This in turn leads to less power and minimum decision-making opportunities in the household. Isolation and loss of agency results in economic dependency. With technological advancements in ventilation system, the door evolved into a curtain, thus increasing the visibility and audibility ratios. Today, we live in open, central, and microwave kitchen housing typologies. With kitchen evolution, calls for urgent attention to reflect back on our built environment and domestic labor structures, to find alternate solutions. It attempts to resolve some of these spatiosexual biases in the house with the proposed Thali NYC, a public infrastructure of food systems and ecologies in the urban environment. With this panel, I want to reimagine this food infrastructure to be more grounded in reality in a sustainable way. Hope you enjoy the film. Need to play it.
This is the story of the program, of the maker, of the user, of what's expected of her, of what happens to her after she delivers those expectations, of what happens to the program itself, of how it evolves and where it takes her. She changes the typology of the house from the corner to the center of the house, and then to the microwave. Biopolitics and technology morphing her space. She surveys herself and traces her own needs. her hands. Her legs, her feet, her head, the ratio of her breasts, her stomach, and what could live in her stomach, how a universe could be born of it.
Everyone needs centrality. All the answers emerge from the center, a collaborative center, unifying all forms of food and seasons.
A diagram that is for all. A diagram that is for one. The pipelines that have been serving other resources must now serve the kitchen. The kitchen demands liberation from the cultural labor of patriarchy. Thali NYC propels Manhattan recipes for diversity and food innovations in multi-family residential houses in the city. Like other trades, electricity, water, gas, the labor will be disseminated for food as well through the self-cleansing pipeline kitchens. Thali NYC is a collaborative food system sourcing fresh produce from nearby farmlands, which are spiced, grilled, and cooked to taste. The kitchen pipeline will be hooked to all of New York.
We have come a long way from Chula kitchens to gas stoves to Frankfurt kitchens. Where huge food processing machines were shaped down to household kitchen-sized microwaves, refrigerators, and other kitchen appliances. Now we are in the era of automated kitchen systems with some or zero human interactions. 50% of the world which constitutes women are subjected to this cultural and educational flaw. Change is inevitable.
Sorry. There's a present that I wanted to share. The voices.
Okay. Are you have a slide you want to share?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good now. Can everyone else hear us?
So get that answer.
I'm not sure why. Yeah, Revo is not working.
Oh no, you don't need to do that. So you should be fine. Is this it?
Yeah.
All right. I think Kat is just taking through it.
Maybe we can start the panel.
Yeah, I'll show
Oh.
the screen. There you go. Okay.
Still can't see anything.
Just it's open up.
Seems like it's a large file, so.
You want to go back to?
Maybe I can.
You can do Control T, not out of practice.
That's fine. Before we begin the panel, I want to present a few case studies of food collectives that artists and communities have initiated in the 5 to 6 decades. This is Food. It's a restaurant in Soho which opened in 1971 by Carol Gooden and Gordon Matta Clark, where artists were invited to be guest chefs. Food was considered to be an active and dynamic site which served nearly 100 people daily. It pioneered a radical approach to art making that directly connected the urban environment and the communities within it. It offered artists not only a place to gather, but also an opportunity for flexible employment and nourishment. That's where Gordon Matta Clark, the artist who did his first wall cut in the Food restaurant. I'm not sure if you... And this is the second case study. It's also in New York. It's called the International Tapa Bars and Restaurant, which was conceived as an artistic project and social experiment carried out between 1984 and 1986. The project engaged food, sensorial experiences, and cultural inventions as vehicles for transmitting and subverting traditions and social practices of the time. This is in 1982. Agnes Dennis and her assistants planted and harvested 1.5 acres of wheat at the Battery Park landfill, a few blocks away from us. The planting consisted of digging 285 furrows by hand, clearing off rocks and garbage, setting up an irrigation system, and placing the seeds, etc. They maintained the field for 4 months, yielding almost 1,000 pounds of healthy golden wheat. Makes me wonder if we can grow abundance in our surrounding to nourish ourselves and the earth. There are some communal kitchens that around the world that are active, and I think Gabriella would be able to talk more on this because she has actually workshopped 200 kitchens in Basel, I think. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Anna for introductions.
Thank you, Swati. So thank you for the Kitchen Evolution film, and now we'd like to turn it over to the panelists. So today's panelists are Lydia and Gabriella. So a little thank you for them both for being here today. Lydia is Kalipoliti. She is an architect, engineer, and scholar whose research focuses on the intersections of architecture, technology, and environmental politics. She is an associate professor at the Cooper Union in New York, and most recently the head co-curator of the Italian Architecture Biennale with the theme Edible, or the Architecture of Metabolism. Gabriela Aquigi Zegara is a Peruvian architect and PhD candidate in art and design research at the FHNW Institute of Art and Design in Basel. Combining her background in landscape design and public art, she creates collective experiences around gardens and kitchens to explore the multi-scalar food systems between Peru and Switzerland. And so now I'll let you guys begin your film.
Thank you. Thanks, Lydia, for being here in person.
Should I sit here?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks. Thanks, Gabriela, for joining us. So Lydia was kind enough to join me for the first screening of the film, which was at Swasi in October, and I'm so grateful that you're here again. I have a question for you from the previous conversation. Your reading of Thali NYC, which through representation externalizes the digestive intestine into the city, versus the design of the Frankfurt kitchen, which conceals the pipes and other kitchen systems, that you also compared to the leakage of the female body. What do you think the closed world, or rather the open world of a public food infrastructure, what would it consist of, and what principles should it embody?
Well, first of all, it's nice to be here. I've never been in this really big office in New York City.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And we did a whole biennale on the theme of food, and I'm very excited to support emerging artists and designers doing work on that subject. And by the way, I brought some books for the office as a gift of the closed worlds. So it's interesting that you changed the film. The first time that you presented it, it was more narrative. You had a narrative of a female that was dressed in a particular way, and her hands were utensils, and it was a little bit more mystical. And today it's a little bit more of not scientific understanding, but a kind of actual evolution of the kitchen in precedence. And relative to your question, I think it's really interesting that the Frankfurt kitchen, which you probably all know, which was invented in the 1920s, the leader of that team was Margaret Schut-Lihotzky. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And she worked with a team of male engineers to create the kitchen, which was the foundation of the modern kitchen. In terms of ergonomy, to make as few movements as possible, and to rely the whole kind of space of the kitchen in automation. That whole narrative of automation and ergonomy was very much celebrated after World War II, when we had examples of the modern kitchen and the housewife, with happy housewives and advertisements of happy housewives serving the family, and the kitchen becoming a place of where you don't really do any labor. And what interested me in your portrayal is the fact that the kitchen is not an aseptic space. Like if you look at how we design modern kitchens, the minimal kitchen, all the wires and the kind of infrastructure of what comes in the space and what comes out of the space needs to be tightly hidden away, like an aseptic theater, like a space of a surgical stage set. Yet the infrastructure is extremely important and is hidden in all sorts of cabinets, and the kitchen is presented in this light. And as practicing architects, you might relate to this. I don't know what kind of kitchens you design here, but it's a kind of, let's say, canon for the modern kitchen to be designed in this way. But I think the evolution, or let's say the future of the kitchen, is a space where physical labor becomes more present. The engagement of the actual physical body with space and the presence of things like microbes and other organisms can create waste products that can become part of a cycle. And as an example, if you can look up, the Microbial Kitchen by Philips. It was a kind of prototype pilot project in 2011, which was all a passive system. It was highly advanced technology, but using special design instruments and airflow and directing airflow in certain microorganisms, they were able to not refrigerate exactly, but keep food cool enough to be consumed at certain times. So I think that, if we think of several years past in the future, it's not sustainable to think of infrastructure in that way, where every single apartment in a city dense of millions of people has its individual kitchen. But we really have to think of infrastructure and how we can, bring resources in and out of large-scale environments. And one way to start doing that, which was interesting to see the kind of hints and processes in what you have presented, is to think of leftovers, of waste, of effluents, and how all of this can become part of a regenerative cycle. And I think in that light, questions of care and labor, which have been vanished in the era of automation. Everything is automated, even this crazy robot that you showed, the Moley robot. That's like the most insane advertisement I've seen in a very long time, where there's like a robot and it has hands, and there's a happy couple, and these crazy hands, the happy couple sits and they have a champagne, and everything is brought to them by these robots. Whereas a more engaged aspect physically with our environment would be a different kind of future that we can anticipate in terms of including labor and care in our built environment.
I agree. I guess one thing that came to my mind, one of the reasons why I am, taking the time to rethinking the Thali NYC was like you said, that I saw a lot of issues with internalizing these food systems within like a tunnel of infrastructure, and people participating in it and making something. But what would that participatory economy look like if everyone starts like you said that not everyone would have like one kitchen per household?
Well, it's also a question. There has to be, like, for these things to subsist realistically, there has to be some analysis and market research. But it's not far off, and it's not something that's a parafictional scenario. I remember having a conversation with, well, he passed away, but he was the president of KPF. I forget the name, but he was the most extraordinary guy. He was a friend with Bill Mencken, who was the chief of the Architects newspaper.
Bill Pedersen.
I'm sorry?
Bill Pedersen.
No.
The one that passed away.
Franz. I will remember the name. But he was, they were building really large scale buildings like you are. And he was saying that basically the amount of wet space and infrastructure that has to go, like, does everybody, like, if you have a survey of how much people use wet spaces, right? Like what's the percentage of time that they use it, and is it actually needed? Like, do single people living in New York use the kitchen more than 10 minutes a day to make coffee? And what do you actually need? And he really was questioning, like, does every single house need to have like a fully equipped kitchen? Or does it have to do with the habits of each individual or cooperative or family or whatever group lives in a house? And he was thinking of communal kitchens, of social space, things that, and that was from KPF. It wasn't from like a crazy social activist from, you know, making gardens, communal gardens. It was somebody that was entrenched in the production of built space in the city. So it's a very important question. Like, do we need all of these kitchens? And does all of this infrastructure, like, what would be the future if we project 50 years in the future of, you know, creating all of these? Because a lot of times, you know, my thesis students, I'm teaching thesis at Cooper Union, and they're all interested in their thesis in things, you know, towns that die, or habits that die, or, you know, buildings that decay, or they're interested in kind of infrastructures of the past in a realm of nostalgia. What lives on? What do we actually need? And what happens to these habits or towns or build infrastructures that are no longer needed and very quickly become obsolete? And I don't know, like it is very possible that we build an excess amount of kitchens and bathrooms in such dense environments, and they're not needed. So communal kitchens, or I mean, Anna Buijane, you had her slide. She was a professor at Columbia and a friend, and she did this whole research on the kitchenless city. But it's also extremely important to think of food as a kind of web of resources and how they're used in urban environments, and what are alternative ways of rerouting resources in the way that we use infrastructure, so that it's not all centralized by, you know, certain pipes, but there are networks in place. Just like, let's say, huge buildings have power banks, and if the light comes out, you know, they use the power banks to, you know, have electricity. There might need to be microgrid networks of supply for different neighborhoods or different kinds of communities that don't only involve power, but also involve food and water and other kinds of resources. So it's a recirculatory way of thinking. And I understand I'm a theorist. I am an engineer also, though. I have an engineering background, and then I kind of switched into architectural theory and history. And I have a very good sense of how this might sound to a big office working in everyday projects. But, you know, it's not sustainable to keep building the way we are for the next 50, 100 years.
Right. But we are putting resources into building these individual kitchens, like in every, I mean, if we are doing the rethinking and building these invisible walls of infrastructure to kind of make them concrete, like why are we not rethinking that? And
yeah, I mean, there's not one solution to this, and we can have a very, you know, long conversation about we can have think tanks for days and ask ourselves, what are the solutions for how, as architects, we may respond to climate change? And food is definitely, you know, food scarcity is a very important topic in climate change. And communal kitchens is one example, but there are others. Like you can, there can be, you know, hydroponic clusters of food growth. Or recently, I was looking at, you know, on the with the opportunity of looking 2 years ago, Rem Koolhaas's exhibition at the Guggenheim with the countryside, I found out researching for the Talent Biennale that there's, especially in London, but also in New York, a lot of the arugula that we get from Whole Foods comes from underground tunnels that are growing farms and different kinds of leaves and species. And the reason is because they use a very specific kind of UV magenta lighting that makes crops grow 60% faster than crops outside. They don't have pesticides and things like that. So they're extremely successful in producing. So, I bought an arugula once and I saw it like produced and I'm like, what is that? And then I Googled and my kids thought it was crazy. Mom, what are you doing? Why is this important? Why do we need to know where everything comes from? But it is important to know where everything comes from and why it comes from a certain place. And, things like that, these kinds of initiatives, these kinds of banks, these are the things that we need to invent in urban environments, or to think of spaces that are about common shared resources that are not necessarily coming from one infrastructural network that signifies authority, let's say.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to say too, hydroponics, that's a big business now. In fact, in New Jersey, there are buildings dedicated to growing leafy vegetables inside. With the UV lighting you're talking about, with drip technology, no soil, nutrients added to the water. That's a business now.
It's a very profitable business. And actually
it's year-round growing.
One of my students wrote a paper, like if you Google countryside exhibition run Koolhaas Guggenheim, you'll get Koolhaas bald because he grew older now, in front of like this magenta field. So like that magenta lighting has become an aesthetic quality of renderings right now. If you render hydroponics or indoor growth of plants, like indoor plant growth, that specific stream of lighting has become an aesthetic quality, like the magenta. And this student analyzed exactly why is this magenta background important in architectural representations. And they also become, it's interesting to see these things that come from the market becoming part of architectural presentations when we teach and we have thesis. And we're not so much far academia and practice. I think there are so many connections.
Yeah, it's so true. Thank you so much for I'm still kind of absorbing.
Audience.
Yeah, I'm still absorbing all the thoughts and that we are almost there. It's not too far away.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the enclosed, some of the examples from the enclosed was.
Oh yeah, I brought some samples of the book for people in the office as a gift.
Thank you.
Because the kind of scope of that book, I brought it because it was sold out and the storefront had like some last copies because it was randomly featured in White Lotus season 2.
Yeah.
Everybody there are no longer available books. But the idea and the research in that book is that we no longer construct only built environments that are inert vessels for habitation, but we also construct artificial natures. The architecture becomes a kind of nature, and in several building environments, there are indoor plants. I don't know if you use them or integrate them in the buildings that you are doing here, but it's definitely a kind of trend moving forward in the future to kind of include fountains and indoor plantation and all of these things, but also there are incredibly important and large-scale infrastructural projects that become attractors of entertainment and leisure for replicating other climates, and this whole culture is, a symptom of late capitalism, but it's also extremely interesting to think of it historically, like what it means to to understand and conceive architecture as the production of new forms of nature. And do we really want that? Is that meaningful moving forward in the future? So the book has a lot of these examples, and some of them start from smaller spaces, some of which are kitchens and that recycle their resources.
Yeah.
I know that Gabriela
Yes.
is online.
Yes.
Yes. Don't get me started. I don't want to talk.
Thank you, Lydia. Gabriela, thank you so much for being here. I'm just gonna quickly ask one question, or if you wanna go ahead and maybe respond to what Lydia said, or.
Yeah, I mean, I took so many notes, and thank you so much, Lydia, for such a graceful deploy of so many examples that I've been taking notes for sure. And I would love to have a glimpse of on that book for that matter. I haven't had the chance. But yeah, I mean, also I was surprised like to see another version of your movie. Anyhow, I think one of the strongest vision that you and thought-provoking for me was like this pipeline in which it seems that that once more we transform this like infrastructure of care in an infrastructure that it's like outside of our bodies, whereas we're producing more and more things. How can we like use digestion as not only a metaphor but as a way to think regeneratively and not just sustainably or circular? And in this case, I was also thinking what would be the use of these new spaces around microbes, around dirt or soil. Or is there any space for soil inside our kitchens in the city? And how can a garden be a kitchen? And how is this even like thought also further in a city as New York, which I'm presuming it is kind of building ideas on how to have more communal spaces that include gardens and self-production of food. I really haven't seen this microbial kitchen from Philips, so now I'm like very curious about this because it's exactly this type of uses of a kitchen that go beyond just like how to put it, to build an infrastructure for one use. I think is like the whole kitchen, if you separate it and like cluster it in heat, in water, and in labor, and then in food, you can find like common grounds in which technology works, but that can or needs the human body trying to not evocate just like a female or a gendered body inside the kitchen, but it needs always someone to activate it. Hopefully, I really hope that there's not a future that like put us a part of our food making. That would be super like dystopic for me at least. And yeah, like I've followed through the research also of Kitchenless City. I think it was through pandemic when I engaged, thanks to Mariale, that also introduced us both. And I was living in Germany, kind of like shifting from landscape architecture to become an urban farmer. And I share this with you also, Swati, that I became such because I saw the necessity of it. It was a moment of a lot of precarity for a diaspora of foreign students in East Germany, trying to cope with, yeah, a lot of things. And a communal kitchen and a communal garden became a place for a lot of design students to to just put hands on matter. And for me, it was like really changing the way I see activism, or like even like the prototyping phases of architecture or landscape architecture, like because I have devoted most of my time before just jumping full hands into food research and building bridges and plazas and dealing with a lot of forest engineers. So there was always a phase of planning, and there was always a phase of like previous studies and interdisciplinary studies, and we brought like here and there, and then a garden became this space of like we're all like design students of master and different like backgrounds, and then we became humans dealing with nature, and in the sense of, okay, we need to grow our food, and this in a scale of a city that it's Dessa, which is like the Bauhaus imaginary of a city. So it's like very small, huge amount of nature, a lot of forest areas, and a lot of close river soils, and a lot of modernist contamination into those soils. So it was an act of resistance, and it was not in a metaphoric way. It was literally an act of resistance, like every day for 1 year, from September 2020 till 2021, when I moved to Switzerland, and I started working around a communal kitchen in an art institute, and what does that represent even. So yeah, that's like just trying to respond into the different topics that you brought forward.
Well, I didn't jump in case there was someone in the chat. I appreciate Gabriella bringing up the cultural issue, which has to be addressed in addition to the logistical issue. And it's really difficult, I think, because there are so many different cultures, and food is such an emotional experience for so many people. And like the kitchen, I've been thinking throughout this whole conversation, it's like this weird, on one hand, nobody questions that food is so important, it gets its own room, that's all it does. This room is dedicated to food. And nobody questions that. It's that important to us, we need to eat to live. But then on the flip side, like in the film and in the earlier version of the film, it also gets removed from the social aspects, the creative aspects, and it gets, so it's like both a shrine and a prison at the same time, of separating food and what we need to live from what everyone can, or from what a lot of people consider their life of family or work or creative pursuits. So do you have any comments, anybody on the panel, about that dichotomy?
Gabrielle, I think it's your question.
Okay. No, I'm like happy.
I know it's a lot. It's been swimming in my head through the whole panel discussion.
I think it's, yeah, thank you. What's your name, sorry?
When it comes Kat.
Which one?
Kat. K-A-T.
Kat. Katie. Okay, nice to meet you. Thank you for your question. And yeah, I think this brings me back to the Dessau kitchen, because most of the students who were trapped during pandemic were from like different backgrounds, and most of the students who were in charge of the kitchen previous pandemic were all German, and it was a circle of like all German speakers. And suddenly I came in because of my interest in cooking, and this opened up a bit more, which was not a direct boundary established by the people, but it was just a matter of representation, which I'm not trying to address myself as like, oh, I represented this much, but this was addressed to me when I left Germany even, and it's like, yeah, more people like from different backgrounds have joined in this kitchen because there was someone else that was not mainly the typical person in a communal kitchen in Germany. So this matter of representation, it's something that it's a fact, it's factual. And also how does the infrastructure allows that to happen is, it will be crazy, but it's also how do we cook? How are we so familiarized with not hot stoves, but fire? How are we familiarized with different sets of herbs, and how do we find them in the kitchen, and how the utensils that serve some people don't serve the other, or yeah, this is just imagining in a nostalgia way, right? But it's also how you think through through what it's there in terms of necessity when we are talking about a communal kitchen specifically. But then also in the case that, and also to maybe to give the word to the rest of the panel, is it's different when this shifts into the private sphere. And I feel that if it has been removed, as in the case of the Kitchenless City, to become a more to decentralize the kitchen from the private sphere, then it becomes a matter of negotiation, how you equipped it, how open you make it, right? Maybe for the rest also.
Thank you.
There's another question.
I have a comment on the conversation we're having just now. When you guys were talking about the concept of a kitchen and how to bring it to everybody, open without walls, like with the infrastructure revealed. I don't know why, but I was thinking about Costco the entire time, like the modern day, like shopping, like grocery store, where there's kind of a booth for like different samples that you could have. But what if Costco, instead of shelves of food that you can get, instead it's like a hydroponic farm, and at each booth you have like different people from different cultures, or like who specialize in different foods, showcase that food and share it to people. Yeah.
Well, that happens with farmers, things like that.
That's true.
Bigger scale.
Bigger scale.
Kind of.
Just talk about growing what you would get,
right.
not as a product, not
Not
as
as
a
market,
display
but
product, but as a process that
Right.
kind of grows itself and becomes the product in the process. So that's not a question, that's a really nice idea. Sue?
Definitely.
In the future, there was one project in the Tallinn Biennale which just closed a few weeks ago, and it was called a 24/7 dining table. So the idea was kind of similar to what you were saying, that instead of having a dining table where things are served when one wants to eat, which is kind of like an order, like a service, there were all of these things that were edible 24/7, like giant mushrooms inside, kind of capsules, and other herbs that were growing, and you could harvest from each one of these stations with, in the proximity of the dining table, what you wanted to access. So it was something that just existed there, from which you could eat certain things at certain moments in time. And it correlates to your idea of the process. And I think that's something extremely important in how we can think about the kitchen in the future. That we don't just think of it as a service, right? But as a kind of space where you can grow, and you can grow some food, and things can not just take it from the market down the street and like put it in the fridge and then eat it, but have a more kind of a dirtier version of the kitchen. I was thinking when you asked your question about the kitchen, Kat, that the kitchen is in fact it has a very interesting history, not just because it's where we go to eat, but it's also historically it has been like the dirty space where you can just do a lot of things. And a lot of artists and architects, when they didn't have anywhere to draw and they did experiments, they went to the kitchen. they wanted to spill paint or do something, they went to the kitchen, and it was you can find like early work of Archigram or other architects in the 60s, and they were calling their drawings the kitchen experiments. And I think that's really interesting to keep that side, to keep a space that's somehow a studio, like in process, that can be dirty and doesn't need to be sanitized. But somehow the way that we design, not in every case, modern kitchens, it's not really like that. It's if you go to order a kitchen from, let's say, like renovate your house, you know, the aesthetic is very, very different. So it's a kind of very clean, minimal, sanitized space that doesn't engender this kind of experiment, dirty place where you can go to. And I think that's a really important function of any house, of any habitation, that there can be a place of experimentation and playfulness. And
yeah, that would also enrich the world in so many ways.
Yes, definitely.
And like we were during the whole discussion talking about infrastructures, like you just kind of defined one version of that infrastructure, and it's not just machines, but kind of organic structures of living, I guess.
A plant could be an infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
Because how to retain soil and have it active and get the light so that it can actually live and give you something is a kind of infrastructure in itself.
Yeah. It's very interesting landscapes it would generate, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anna, for your question.